Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to my class. I am Farah Torreta, and today we are going to talk about comparative education. Its aim is to explain educational systems, processes, or outcomes, help in the development of educational institutions and practices, emphasizing the relationship between education and society, informing generalized statements about education relevant in more than one country. To achieve this aim, comparative education has the following specific objectives. By the end of this lesson, the student should be able to state a guiding definition of comparative education, highlight the rationale for studying comparative education by educational practitioners in his or her country, and identify some of the challenges that the comparative educationist are faced in his or her quest in using information from other countries in the 21st century. What is comparative education? Comparative education is the comparative study of educational theories and practices in various countries. Comparative education attempts to use cross-national data to test propositions about the relationship between education and society and between teaching practices and learning outcomes. Comparative education considers the implications of comparative studies for the formation and implementation of policies in education, social, national, and international development. Comparative education invites contributions from associated disciplines in the field of government, management, sociology, and technology, and communications which affect educational research and policy decisions. The field of comparative education is supported by many projects associated with the UNESCO and the national education ministries of various nations. Comparative education has been defined in different ways by various authors, but what is common in the definition is the emphasis on the use of data from another educational system. According to Sudhe, 2006, has quoted various definitions as put forward by renowned comparativists, taking another angle in the above comparativist, who either defines comparative education as focusing on various education systems, such as GTAO, or as an interdisciplinary social science, such as NOAA and Eckstein. GTAO in 1996 defined comparative education as a discipline, the study of educational systems in which one seeks to understand the similarities and differences among educational systems. Noah and Eckstein in 1969 defined comparative education as follows. Comparative education is potentially more than a collection of data and perspectives from social science applied to education in different countries. Neither the topic of education nor the cross-national dimension is central to any of the social sciences, nor as the social science concerns, and the cross-national dimension central to the works of educators. The field of comparative education is best defined as an intersection of social sciences, education, and cross-national study. According to Isaac Kandel, 1881-1965, took up Sandler's view that comparative education should not emphasize only educational setup, organization, administration, methods, curriculum and teaching, but also the causes behind educational problems of different countries and attempted solutions in the light of their social, political, cultural, and national ideologies. Isaac Kandel believed in the theory of causation. This a shaping factor of national education systems he called national character. Nicholas Hans, 1888 up to 1969, arrived at the following classification of three groups of factors influencing the educational development in countries. Number 1, natural factors. This refers to race, environment, and language. Number 2, religious factors. This refers to Catholicism, Anglicanism, and Protestantism. Number 3, secular factors. This refers to humanism, socialism, and nationalism. The operation of these factors he illustrates in his book with the examples of England, USA, France, and USSR. Vernon Mallinson agrees with Hans and Kandel about comparative education, laying emphasis on the societal contextual factors shaping education systems. To him, comparative education means a systematic examination of other cultures and other systems of education, deriving from these cultures in order to discover resemblances and differences, and why variant solutions have been attempted to problems that are common to all. George Bereday, 1920 up to 1983. He emphasized the importance of methodology in comparative education, through which lessons for improving the own home education system could be deduced from the variations in educational practices in different societies. In his classic book, Comparative Education, 1964, he describes comparative education as making sense out of the similarities and differences among educational systems. The catalogs educational methods across national frontiers, and in this catalog, each country appears as one variant of the total store of mankind's educational experiences. Philip E. Jones, an Australian comparativist, attaches importance to using the methodology of comparative education for educational planning. He notes that comparative education, with its rapidly increasing resources and its hope for better methods, seems admirably suited to provide a more rational basis for the planning of education. Edmund J. King, 1914 up to 2002. In his book Comparative Studies and Educational Decision, takes the planning angle when he expresses the view that comparative education is a discipline which systematizes our observations and conclusions in relation to the shaping of the future. To him, this world now is no longer possible to find the solutions of any educational or social problem within that country, and thus we are to look for it from other countries, cultures, and societies. Comparative education serves this purpose to a considerable extent, at least in the world of education. Michael Sandler, 1861 up to 1943. In a well-known lecture which he delivered in 19,000, he contended that in studying foreign system of education, it should not be forgotten that things outside the school matter even more than things inside, and that an education system is the outcome of societal forces which have been operated over an extended period. Thus, he opened a new way of conceptualizing comparative education and foreign education systems, namely as the outcome of societal or contextual forces. These are the objectives and scope of comparative education. According to Harold J. Noah and Max Eckstein, 1993, comparative education has four purposes. First, to describe educational systems, processes, or outcomes. Secondly, to assist in the development of educational systems and practices. Thirdly, to highlight the relationships between education and society. And lastly, to establish generalized statements about education. Those are valid in more than one country. What is the purpose of studying comparative education? So there are various reasons why comparative education should be studied by prospective teachers and reformers of education in any country of the world. When it comes to description, the most basic utility of comparative education is to describe education systems or learning communities within their social context in order to satisfy the yearning for knowledge, which is part of human nature. According to Bereday, 1964 up to 5, puts it that the foremost justification of comparative education is intellectual. The humans study comparative education because they want to know. Understanding, interpreting, and explaining. Comparative education also satisfies the need to understand educational systems, are explained or understood from surrounding contextual forces which shape them. Conversely, if education systems are also shaped by the societal metrics in which they are embedded, and if education systems in turn shape societies and cultures, then the comparative study of education systems also fosters an understanding of cultures or societies. Noah's 1986 thesis of education as the touchstone of society is very topical here. In this respect, the value of comparative education is very topical in times of multicultural societies and of intercultural education. Evaluation. Comparative education serves the purpose of evaluating education systems, the own education systems, as well as universal evaluation of education systems. The universal evaluation entails how well the education systems of the world rise to the challenges of the 21st century world, as well as an estimation of the limits and possibilities of the societal effect of education. Intellectual. Comparative education is an intellectual activity that scholars can pursue to the highest level of possible in the academic ladder. They can pursue it in their master's and doctoral programs. An individual can do this in order to enhance his or her intellectual capacity concerning other systems of education with the purpose of enlightenment. This knowledge would help the individual to understand their education system better and that of others with the intention of improving and solving problems in their own system. Planning. Modern societies have come to appreciate the importance of planning. Various problems that are associated with overpopulation, underproduction, diseases, economic non-viability, industrialization, and social ills can be tackled through planning. Comparative education is also pursued to design a new education system, to plan education, and to reform education systems, according to Stein and Walter, 2010. Practicability. We are living in a practical age in which education is regarded as a consumer good. The pattern of education which loses its practicability goes on being replaced by such patterns, which have practical utility. Those patterns of education that have no practical utility are being reformed. Humanitarian viewpoint. The original inspiration source of the scholarly field of comparative education, the philanthropic ideal of the time of Julian, 1775 up to 1848, remains the most noble cause in comparative education. Serving and improving the state of humanity is in the current age of globalization more urgent than ever by nurturing a global citizen equipped with a creative, critical, and caring mindset. Education problems in world perspective. Most countries of the world have identical problems in their educational perspective. Therefore, it is possible for them to learn lessons from each other on how they resolve a particular problem. The comparative approach would yield a deeper understanding of educational problems and their solutions. In this era, the purpose of comparative education would be better understanding of the changed circumstances and to have better equipment to fulfill the new responsibilities. Innovation in education. There are many innovations which are being introduced to education today. The development of technology has facilitated new methods of organizing learning. In most of the developing countries, distance education with the use of computer-assisted learning is viewed as the panacea of educational access and the associated problems. Economics of education. Much of the massive expansion in the provision of education since the middle of the 20th century took place based on the belief that the provision of education result in economic growth and increased economic productivity. In the recent years, research has generated the realization that the spread of education is positively correlated with increasing productivity. Education for international understanding. International understanding is a central purpose for studying comparative education. The two world wars made men to seek even more seriously the various ways of promoting international understanding. United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, have recognized that wars begin from the minds of men. relax national pride. This is necessary for combat feelings of superiority, especially among the populations of countries technologically and economically developed and with military powers. The need to understand that other countries are essential for their sustenance and therefore must work for mutual benefit of each other. This is the end of my lesson. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have learned something new today.